It started as just another concert. Elvis was on stage, lights blinding, music shaking the walls, but then he saw her, Priscilla, dancing in the audience. And in that moment, the king forgot about the crowd, the song, even the spotlight. His gaze never left her. The crowd was buzzing that night. You could feel it, the kind of electric tension that made the air feel heavy and alive at the same time. Thousands of voices blended into one steady hum, restless but excited, like a sea of energy waiting for a spark. Somewhere in the middle of that ocean of faces, one woman sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes scanning the stage that was still dark. She wasn't screaming like the others. She wasn't waving her arms. She was just waiting. Then, without warning, the lights exploded into life. The first chord rang out sharp, loud, and full of swagger. The audience erupted, their screams shaking the walls. And there he was. Elvis Presley. He didn't walk onto the stage. He owned it the moment his boot touched the floor. His white jumpsuit caught the light like it was woven from stars, the gold patterns glittering with every move. His hair, slicked back to perfection, seemed untouched by time or gravity. The band launched into the opening notes of a fan favorite, and the man himself started to sing, smooth, rich, effortless. He should have been locked in on the song, riding the rhythm, scanning the crowd in wide sweeps like he always did. But tonight, something different happened. Halfway through the first verse, his eyes stopped moving. They locked on one spot in the crowd. It wasn't a frantic fan reaching for him. It wasn't someone holding a flashy sign. It was her, the woman sitting still, her gaze steady, almost calm compared to the chaos around her. She wasn't trying to be noticed, and maybe that's exactly why she was. From that moment on, something shifted. His voice didn't falter, but there was a subtle change in it, a softness on certain notes, a sharper edge on others, like he was performing for an audience of one. The crowd was still roaring, but in his mind it was quiet everywhere except where she sat. For a few seconds they just looked at each other, him on the stage, bathed in gold light, her in the shadows of the crowd. And yet it felt like they were alone in the room. This wasn't part of the show, this wasn't rehearsed, and maybe that's why it felt so dangerous. He kept singing, but his eyes kept coming back to her. 3 lines later, another glance. By the next chorus, he wasn't even hiding it. Every time he turned his head, his gaze found hers again, like there was a magnetic pull neither of them could break. She shifted slightly in her seat, finally aware of the attention. And when she smiled, just a small, almost shy smile, something in him reacted. His own lips curled into the faintest smirk, the kind that said, "I see you." The band probably noticed. Maybe even some of the front row fans saw the way his focus wasn't drifting anywhere else. But most of the crowd was too lost in the music to realize that something quiet but powerful was happening right in front of them. He hit the final note of the verse, leaned into the mic, and for just a heartbeat, didn't move. He was still starring. And then, as if catching himself, he snapped back into his usual rhythm, packing the stage, interacting with the audience like the seasoned performer he was. But it was too late. That moment had already happened. And it wasn't going away. To understand why this moment felt so charged, you have to know where and when it happened. It was the early 1970s, Las Vegas. Elvis was in the middle of one of his legendary residencies, performing night after night to sold-out rooms that glittered with neon and champagne. The venue smelled faintly of cigars and expensive perfume, the kind of place where everyone wanted to be seen. That night, Priscilla wasn't there as a VIP or in some roped-off section. She was just another face in the crowd, or at least that's how it seemed. She had decided to come quietly without drawing attention. Her outfit wasn't loud, but it was elegant. A simple dress that caught the light when she moved, her hair styled neatly, her makeup soft but flawless. She blended in until you looked closer. She hadn't planned to catch his attention. Maybe she had even convinced herself he wouldn't notice her in such a big crowd. But she chose a seat that gave her a perfect view of the stage, close enough to see every expression, far enough that she wouldn't be swallowed by the frenzy of fans pressing against the front. The room itself was alive. Every table was filled, glasses clinking softly beneath the rumble of voices. Waiters in crisp uniforms moved like clockwork, weaving between chairs, balancing trays heavy with drinks. From the stage, the band was already warming up, testing mics, tuning guitars. There was a restless energy in the air, the kind that builds and builds until the first note finally releases it. Priscilla sat back, her eyes scanning the stage as if trying to memorize every detail before the man himself appeared. She knew this wasn't just any show. Elvis was at the peak of his live performance powers, commanding not just the room, but the city itself. In Las Vegas, you could feel when Elvis was in town. The lights dimmed. The chatter died instantly, replaced by a wave of cheers. Somewhere deep inside the crowd, her heartbeat matched the rhythm of the drums as they kicked into the intro. And then he appeared. If you've never seen Elvis Presley walk onto a stage, you might think the stories are exaggerated, but they're not. There was a presence about him, part confidence, part mystery, part something you couldn't quite name. He didn't just step into the spotlight, he filled it, every inch of it. Priscilla watched, her expression calm, but inside a quiet storm was beginning to build. She had seen him perform before, of course, but this time felt different. This time there was an edge to the air, a sense that something unplanned was about to happen. She leaned slightly forward, resting her elbows on the table as he began to sing. His voice was rich, warm, and full, wrapping around the room like a velvet ribbon. She didn't know it yet, but in just a few lines, that voice was going to find her in the crowd, and it wouldn't let go. Because in less than a minute, Elvis Presley's eyes would lock on hers, and neither of them would look away. From the moment he spotted her, something inside him shifted. Elvis had always been a master of working the room, scanning the crowd, locking eyes for a second, moving on, making every fan feel like they'd been seen. But this was different. He was in the middle of a verse when his gaze froze. His body kept moving in rhythm, his voice never wavered, but his eyes, those piercing, almost impossible blue eyes, had found something they didn't want to let go of. There she was. Not screaming, not waving her arms, not even leaning forward to catch his attention. Just sitting there, composed, calm, but with a presence that was louder than any cheer in the room. He tried to keep singing as if nothing had happened, but every few seconds, without meaning to, his gaze drifted back. It was like a compass needle snapping to the same point no matter how many times you turn it. From where she sat, Priscilla noticed. At first, she thought it was a coincidence, maybe he was just scanning the audience. But then it happened again, and again. And by the fourth time, it was no longer a question. He was looking right at her. The lights bounced off his white jumpsuit, casting gold highlights on his face. His hair caught the glow as he tilted his head, almost like he was studying her. And though his lips were still singing, there was a small curve at the corner of his mouth, a knowing, almost secret smile. The band kept playing, locked into the groove, but even they started to sense something was different. Elvis wasn't packing the stage like he usually did. He wasn't bouncing between sides, leaning into fans, or trading playful glances with the musicians. No, he was anchored. And every time the song reached a high point, his eyes would return to hers like they were the only two people in the room. The crowd had no idea they were witnessing something private. To them, it was just another flawless performance. But to Elvis and Priscilla, the air between them had changed. It was charged. As the song pushed toward the chorus, he stepped closer to the edge of the stage, just enough to narrow the distance, but not enough to make it obvious. His voice softened in places where it usually soared, almost as if he were singing directly to her. Priscilla felt it too. Her chest tightened, her breath shallow. She tried to hold his gaze, but every time she did, it was like looking into a current strong enough to pull her in. By the time the final note of the song rang out, the connection between them was undeniable. Elvis didn't say a word, didn't point, didn't make any grand gesture. But the message was there in his eyes, in the slight delay before he turned away, in the way he held that last look just a second longer than necessary. And the moment he stepped back from the microphone, she knew. Whatever was happening, it wasn't over yet. The next song kicked in, faster, brighter, full of rhythm. It was one of those tracks that made people instinctively move in their seats, tapping their feet, clapping along. And that's exactly what Priscilla started to do without even realizing it. At first, it was just a small sway, the kind of natural movement anyone makes when they hear a beat they love. But then the music pulled her deeper. Her shoulders loosened, her head tilted, her hair catching the soft light every time she moved. From the stage, Elvis saw every bit of it, and his performance shifted. He started to match her rhythm, not in an obvious way, but in subtle changes to his delivery. A pause here, a drawn-out note there. He leaned into the beat the way she leaned into her swaying. It was as if the two of them were having a silent conversation through the music. The crowd around her noticed something too. A few glanced her way, curious why Elvis's eyes kept returning to the same spot. But most people were too busy singing along to realize there was a magnetic current running between the stage and one woman in the crowd. Priscilla didn't break eye contact. She didn't try to hide the fact that she was enjoying the moment. She let the music move her a little faster now, a little freer. Her smile widened, not flashy, but warm and real. And Elvis, he was feeding off it. He began to play with the song, bending it to his will, adding flourishes and little vocal riffs he didn't normally use. When he hit the high points, his gaze locked in with hers, almost daring her to keep up. She did. The room's energy started to shift. Fans could feel something different in the air. They might not have known why, but they knew this performance was unlike the others. The music built to a crescendo, and for a split second, Elvis did something he never did in the middle of a song. He laughed. Just a short, breathy chuckle into the mic, his eyes never leaving hers. Priscilla's pulse quickened. She didn't know if anyone else noticed that moment, but she did, and she knew it was for her. By the time the song ended, the entire room was on its feet, clapping and cheering. Elvis gave his usual bows, soaking in the applause, but when he straightened up, his head turned in her direction one last time. This wasn't just a passing glance now. It was an anchor, a tether, a silent promise that something was coming. And Priscilla knew, deep down, that after tonight, nothing would be quite the same again. The next song began, slower this time. The lights dimmed to a soft amber glow, wrapping the room in warmth. The crowd leaned in, almost instinctively, as if they knew they were about to witness something more intimate. Elvis stood at the center of the stage, microphone in hand, his posture relaxed, but his eyes, those sharp blue eyes, were fixed on a single point. Her. It was no longer a matter of chance glances. This was deliberate. Every lyric, every pause, every slight tilt of his head seemed to be directed at her. And though there were hundreds of people between them, it felt like the space had shrunk until it was only the two of them in the room. Priscilla's breath caught in her throat. She didn't dare look away now. The connection was too strong, too magnetic. Every time their eyes met, it was like a silent exchange, questions, answers, feelings, all without a single word being spoken. She tilted her head ever so slightly, and he mirrored the motion. She smiled faintly, and a half-smirk appeared on his lips in return. It was playful, almost conspiratorial, as if they were sharing a secret no one else could hear. The music swelled, and with it so did the tension. It wasn't nervousness. It was something deeper, an unspoken awareness that they were both caught in a moment they couldn't and didn't want to break free from. Every so often, Elvis would look away, maybe to keep the audience engaged, maybe to avoid making the connection too obvious. But within seconds, his eyes would return to hers, drawn back like a tide to the shore. From her seat, Priscilla could feel her pulse in her fingertips. She wasn't the type to get swept up in daydreams, but this didn't feel like a dream. This felt real. Real in a way that made the rest of the room fade into shadows. The song reached its final verse, and for a moment, Elvis held the microphone away from his mouth, letting the band carry the melody. His gaze never wavered. It was as if they were speaking to each other without sound. I see you. I see you too. The last note rang out, long and lingering, and the crowd erupted in applause. But for a split second before he turned to acknowledge them, he held her gaze, just long enough to make sure she knew it wasn't an accident. And in that silent, unbroken stare, a promise seemed to pass between them, one that neither of them had yet put into words. The show carried on, song after song, each one delivered with Elvis's trademark charisma. But behind the bright lights and thunderous applause, there was an undercurrent running through the night. Every time he walked to her side of the stage, his steps slowed. Every time he glanced in her direction, his voice seemed to warm, softening just slightly. To anyone else, it looked like he was simply working the crowd. But to her, it felt like something more, like he was speaking in a code only the two of them understood. And then, just as quickly as it had begun, the final song came. The band hit the last note, and the crowd rose to its feet. Cheers shook the walls, hands clapped in unison, whistles pierced the air. Elvis bowed deeply, his smile wide and genuine. But even in that moment, when most performers would be soaking in the spotlight, he stole one last glance at her. It was brief but unmistakable. Then he was gone, disappearing behind the curtain as the applause continued. Backstage, the air was different. The roar of the crowd was muffled now, replaced by the chatter of crew members, the clink of glasses, the faint echo of instruments being packed away. Elvis walked down the narrow hallway, but his mind wasn't on the next night's set list or the reviews that would be printed in the morning. He was thinking about her. He paused near his dressing room door, leaning against the wall for a moment. Who was she? The question ran through his mind over and over. He could still see her in the crowd, calm, graceful, and yet somehow brighter than the neon lights of the strip. Meanwhile, Priscilla stayed in her seat for a moment after the show ended. She watched people gather their coats, laugh, and chatter as they headed toward the exits. But she didn't move. Part of her wanted to leave quietly to let the night remain a perfect, untouchable memory. But another part, one she didn't want to admit to herself, hoped that maybe, somehow, he'd find a way to speak to her. A waiter passed by, clearing glasses from the table. She thanked him softly, then finally stood. The crowd was thinning now, the room echoing with the last remnants of applause. Backstage, Elvis's voice broke through the hallway noise. "Find out if she's still here," he told a member of his team, keeping his tone casual but his eyes sharp. The man nodded and disappeared toward the stage entrance. Elvis leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. He wasn't sure what he'd say if he saw her again, but he knew he'd regret it if he didn't try. Out in the main room, Priscilla stepped toward the exit, the cool air of the casino just a few feet away. She didn't know that behind the curtain, Elvis Presley had just set a quiet plan in motion. And she didn't know that the night was far from over. The backstage corridor was quiet now, the distant hum of the crowd replaced by the soft shuffle of crew members finishing their work. Elvis stood just inside the doorway to his dressing room, hands resting on his hips, his mind fixed on one thought. Then from down the hall a voice, "She's still here." He looked up sharply. The stagehand gave a small nod toward the main room. By the bar, talking to someone. Elvis didn't rush, he never rushed, but his steps were steady, purposeful, as he made his way toward the back entrance to the showroom. He paused just behind the curtain, scanning the space until he saw her. Priscilla was leaning lightly against the bar, her back to him, her dark hair falling softly over her shoulder. She wasn't surrounded by admirers, wasn't looking for attention. She was just there. For a moment he stayed still, watching, then he stepped forward. The sound of his boots on the floor made her turn. And when their eyes met again, it was like that thread between them, stretched tight through an entire performance, snapped back into place. "Evening," he said, his voice low, smooth. She smiled faintly, "Hello." For a few seconds, neither of them said anything more. They didn't need to. The air was already thick with the weight of everything they hadn't spoken during the show. "I hope you enjoyed the performance," he finally said. "I did," she replied softly. "It felt different." He tilted his head. "Different how?" Her lips curved, but she didn't answer right away. "Like it was meant for me." That made him laugh, just a quiet, knowing laugh, the same one she'd heard slip through the microphone earlier. Maybe it was. The words hung there between them, neither of them breaking eye contact. Around them, the room continued to empty, waiters clearing tables, the distant sounds of slot machines in the casino outside. But in that small circle of space, it was just the two of them. He gestured toward an empty table in the corner. "Can I buy you a drink?" She hesitated, then nodded. They sat, and for the first time that night, they were close enough to really see each other, the little details, the quiet movements. Their conversation was light at first, safe, polite, the way strangers speak when they're feeling each other out. But every now and then, one of them would say something that carried a little more weight, a little more meaning. And each time, it felt like they were peeling back a layer neither of them had expected to touch. When the drinks came, they didn't touch them right away. The real intoxication was in the way they spoke, in the glances that lingered, in the pauses that said more than the words. By the time they realized how much time had passed, the room was nearly empty. "I should let you get some rest," she said finally, though her voice didn't sound convinced. "Maybe," he replied, leaning back in his chair, "but something tells me this isn't the last time we'll talk." And for the first time all night, she was the one who looked away first. Priscilla left the showroom with the quiet hum of the casino washing over her. The neon lights felt a little softer, the sounds a little more distant, like the world outside hadn't quite caught up with what had just happened. She walked slowly, her heels clicking against the marble floor, replaying the night in her mind, every glance, every smile, every unspoken word. She wasn't sure if she would see him again, and yet deep down she felt certain she would. Backstage, Elvis stood at the same table where they'd spoken, one hand resting on the back of the chair she'd just vacated. He wasn't a man easily distracted. Years of fame had taught him how to keep moving, how to keep working. But this was different. Something about her had lingered in the space even after she walked away. He thought about the way she had looked at him, not with the wild-eyed frenzy of most fans, but with something steadier, calmer, more knowing. It was rare for him to feel seen beyond the lights, beyond the image. But tonight he had. The rest of the night moved on without him. He could hear the casino floor roaring, the dice rolling, the laughter of tourists floating up from the lobby. But in his mind, it was still the dim light of the showroom, still her face in the crowd, still that feeling of being pulled toward someone without even trying. Priscilla, meanwhile, reached her room and closed the door softly behind her. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at her reflection in the mirror. She didn't look different. The same hair, the same dress, the same face. But inside, something had shifted. She thought about the way he had said maybe it was. The way he had matched her movements from the stage. The way his eyes had found hers again and again, no matter how far apart they were. It wasn't just attraction. It wasn't just charm. It was something quieter, rarer, a connection that didn't need to be explained. And though she didn't know it yet, that night would become a turning point. The kind of moment you look back on years later and realize it was the start of something you couldn't have predicted, even if you tried. The lights of Las Vegas shone bright outside her window, but she barely noticed them. Her mind was still in the showroom, in the music, in the way the world had seemed to narrow down to one voice and one set of eyes. And somewhere, just a few floors below, Elvis Presley was thinking the same thing. That sometimes, in the middle of the noise and the lights and the chaos of life, you find something, someone, that makes everything else fade away. And when you do, you can't help but stare.